God exists through mathematics. It can be proven mathematically. 0 to the power of 0 equals what? 0. Most people would expect it to be 0. But the answer is actually 1. So if you have your phone, pull it out for a second. If you take 0 to the power of 0, how could we find, without just using that as the equation to define it as the number 1, right? And if you go on Google Calculator right now and do 0 to the power of 0, it'll give you the answer as 1. But let's go beyond that to understand why does 0 to the power of 0 actually equal 1 in truth, not just because it's some mathematical definition that somebody came along and said it must be so. So let's take a smaller number, right? And take, 0.5 to the power of x to the y right here. That's how you do it. The same 0.5 equals 0.707, right? 0.707. Now, if I go with a smaller number, will the result be larger? So 0.05, the last time it was 0.5, to the power of 0.05 equals 0.86. That's bigger than 0.707. So let's go 0.005 to the power of 0.005 equals 0.97. So let's do 10 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 5 to the power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 5. And it's 0.9999998. You see what's happening? It's converging to 1. So as I approach 0, 0 to the power of 0 equals 1. That means nothing to the power of nothing equals everything. I tend to think of that which I know is what I call my conscious mind. That which I know I don't know could be analogously my subconscious mind. And then there's something beyond the border. Once you go past the I know what I know what I don't know. So I'm not an ice skater and I know I don't know how to ice skate well, so I don't really know ice skating. But then there's another realm beyond that, which is the I don't even know what I don't know. We tend to call that something in science, as we call it, entropy. Entropy means randomness, but that could just be the boundary of where our knowledge ended and our ignorance began, our true ignorance. I don't need to be a physicist per se to know that I don't know physics. Someone else might know physics. Okay, fine. But then there's this realm that's beyond that, and we tend to think of that as being devoid of pattern. What if it's all patterned? What if all of it is patterned? Because from a mathematics perspective, there's no true entropy. I don't believe in entropy. So when you think about this, right, I have discovered many patterns now in mathematics, and I've come to realize that every time I've searched for a pattern, the pattern was found. But our science doesn't want to find patterns, because as soon as you find a pattern, that implies that there is a God. And people don't feel comfortable with that in general, right? Or maybe not a God figure, but there's some intelligent design.
Right.
It's not random, right? So the next thing I was trying to show is that if you have even one pattern within a sea of supposed randomness, then you cannot rule out that the entire sea of randomness is not entirely patterned. And because if you think about it though, science is the one thing that all of our knowledge is constantly changing. We thought a certain way about things. Hey, back in the 40s, smoking was healthy. So what we think of as science, it's the one thing that's constantly changing. Man being, related to the number 6. Well, that makes me immediately think of the hexagram, right? Which is the Star of David or Metatron's cube, or there's so many different names for this, right? And it's not just in Judaism, it shows up everywhere, literally shows up everywhere. I don't know if you guys saw the latest Johns Hopkins research also that showed they did a kind of 23andMe test. Well, they found that the people that were living, and without getting too controversial here, but this is Johns Hopkins study that just came out, the people that were living in Palestine were actually from that area of the world at the time of the biblical time. And that the people that are living in Israel now don't actually have that DNA. Now you can argue, hey, right or wrong or whatever, and I'm certainly not a fan of what happened with the Holocaust. In fact, I've been a very outspoken proponent of, making sure that we never have those kinds of issues come up again. And we have one today. And it's interesting how it basically flipped, right? Because I've been to Yad Vashem, and I find it a terrible travesty that we can sit here and justify the death of tens of thousands of people, and thousands and thousands, at least 40% would be children under the age of 10, and say, oh, it's because we're going after the bad guys. To me, this is like, it reminds me of Saul Alinsky, who was a social agitator, who wrote that our world is not a world of angels, rather it is a world of angles. A world where men speak of moral principle yet act on power principle. A world where we are always moral and our enemies, whomever they are always immoral. This is unfortunately, too much of, it's taken over many of the chapters of the human story. And I think that part of it's got to end. But when I start thinking about the six, and your point, I think of Metatron's cube. I think of The Vitruvian Man, also by Leonardo da Vinci, because that's also tied to the same thing. And within 6-point perspective, you can create all geometric forms. So all of the Platonic solids that we know of, and it could be that, Plato got all of this information, who knows, from the Egyptian mystery schools. We know he went. We know Socrates went to the Egyptian mystery schools, but the Egyptian mystery schools didn't want to be quoted anyway. So we're thankful, at least, to the Greeks for having left records for us to basically find. But what's interesting about it is the Platonic solids are, it starts with a tetrahedron. A tetrahedron is a shape that would be an equilateral triangle into a three-dimensional object. So 4 sides of equilateral triangle, right? Then you have a cube. A cube would be 6 sides of a square, right? And then you have an octahedron. So the way that would get formed is you would take the center point of a square and connect the center points of each of those 6 sides, and it creates a shape that looks like a pyramid and an inverted pyramid, right, attached to it. Then you've got an icosahedron, you've got a dodecahedron, and then some would argue an icosahedron, which would be the combination of the two. Because, again, if you took an icosahedron, which is supposed to be the structure of water clusters, take the center point of it and attach all of those and connect the dots of it, you'd have a dodecahedron. So one is part of the other, without a doubt. How is it that every single form that's regular in the universe, regular meaning it only has, like a dodecahedron, it has basically 12 sides of pentagons. So perfect pentagons, they're regular pentagons. How is it that all forms of life are based on these structures? Plankton is the exact shape of a dodecahedron. Every single shape that exists in the universe in regular form can be made inside of, without any measurements whatsoever. I don't need to measure anything. I can make all of those forms perfectly in perspective geometry inside of the Star of David, inside of the Merkaba. To me, that implies a level of design that is so far beyond anything we could ever have constructed. And it implies an architect behind all of it. And it goes beyond implying it. That, in combination with 0 to the power of 0, says that, to me, unequivocally, there is definitely a God. And we have a purpose for being here. But math, we try to learn math without meaning. Math without meaning is just banal information. It means nothing. So we have a hard time learning it. People struggle to learn mathematics, and they get a bad relationship with mathematics in junior high. Actually, the word mathematics did not mean the science of quantity until Aristotle. At Plato's time and before that, mathematics just meant learning. That's why the word polymath just means many, poly, learning. So it was synonymous with all learning because mathematics was just the language of all learning. Another thing people don't realize is this was an age, Greeks didn't have numbers like we have. They used letters to describe their numbers. So the letter alpha was the number 1. The letter, beta was the number 2. And this was true also in Hebrew, in Phoenician, all the ancient languages. They were all using their letters to represent their numbers. It wasn't until we had the benefit of having the Arabs come up with the Arabic numeral system, right? And we got all of the numbers that we currently have. But when you think about that, that means that all of the things that were written had both a literary meaning and a mathematical meaning. And this is there's a whole study of this that people have long ignored, which is called gematria, right? And so there are hidden codes within the Bible that people that study this stuff swear by, because they can find these hidden codes inside of it, because that's the way it was written in the first place. So this concept of X, you're talking about Malcolm X and May 19th, I'm May 16th. So you have to be able to look at math as a mirror reflection, at least in 4 dimensions, right? And that's an important aspect of it. But Part of the reason also that X becomes so critically important is because we have a right brain and we have a left brain. So our left brain is the rational seat of thought. So if I look at my left temporal lobe, that's where my brain processes numbers and mathematics, number theory, etc. I look at the right temporal lobe. So it's just the exact same anatomy of the brain, but on the opposite side, that's where my brain processes music. So you got math and music. Now language is at the center of the brain, right? It's slightly more to the left side. And then you got geometry right around the center as well. That's why geometry is so powerful, it's like a QR code for the subconscious mind, to awaken this electrical canopy around your pituitary gland and your pineal gland. Geometry is the doorway. Now, it's interesting because our right eye connects to the left hemisphere of the brain. The left eye connects to the right hemisphere of the brain. It creates an X. Those optic nerves create an X right at the pituitary gland called the optic chiasm. When the X is activated properly, you can see both with the rational mind as well as with the intuitive mind. You can combine the benefits of masculine and feminine together, right, and have a more balanced society. Now we're making this we're crossing the transit, going from the left brain, which it was for my growing up years, becoming X-Men. Isn't that funny? You just got to understand what it's there for and that you can activate it. And bringing it into our awareness is 9/10 of it. You literally have to realize that you are that.
You are that.
You have the ability to become a more evolved, divine human being. But it's not going to be for everyone. Because as Leonardo da Vinci says, there's 3 types of people. Those who see, those who can see once they're shown by someone else who can see, and those who simply don't see. And that's okay, because the world needs that too. There's a new movie that just came out on Netflix this last week called Orion and the Dark. And it's a story about a little boy who's terrified of the dark. It's a cartoon kind of a show. It seems like it's for kids, but it's actually an adult. And the whole story is about this kid who wants to overcome his fears. And he's paralyzed by fear. He's afraid of everything. He wants to go on this field trip to this planetarium, and he decides he can't go. And so in the middle of the night, he's sleeping, he's terrified of it the next day. The dark shows up in his room as a monster and carries him off for a full day. Goes around the world and brings darkness to the world. And he gets an appreciation that darkness is necessary for light and life. That the darkness is what makes the light have its contrast. That darkness is not the absence of light. Rather, it's simply the absorption of it. So if we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, you have certain colors that on the spectrum or wheel of colors that will have its opposite. You've got these opposite colors. So the opposite of white and black are actually the same color. One is just absorbing and the other is reflecting, but it's the same in the color spectrum. White is reflecting all colors and black is absorbing all colors. There's really no difference though. We look at it as black and white, even on yin yang, and we say, oh, that's the light and that's the dark, and we can make and ascribe certain values to each one of those things, but actually it's just absorption and reflection. It's really not different at its core. It's just we're only seeing one aspect of the white. In order for the white to exist, the black must be absorbed. In order for the black to exist as reflection, the white must be absorbed. We don't have the difference and differentiation that we want to apply to everything. It's just the way we see the world, because we don't see the world as it truly is. We see the world as we are. It's hard to separate my conditioning biases from the way I experience the world. It's really about learning how to merge with the aspects of yourself that you're afraid of. The aspects of yourself that you had judged negatively. And I don't believe the world's a difficult place because people hate each other so much. I think the world can be a difficult place because we hate ourselves. And the more we hate ourselves, the more difficult experience we have in this world. We are what we judge. In essence, we will attract what we judge until we no longer judge what we attract. We all get in these situations where we want to judge our darkness. And we don't realize that the more we do that, the more we separate the world around us from where we actually want to be.